3 of A Christmas Carol. Scrooge awoke in his own bedroom, but the walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, heaped upon the floor to form kind of a throne where turkeys, geese, game, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausage, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red hot chestnuts, juicy oranges, immense 12th cakes, and great bowls of punch. In easy state upon this couch there sat a giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in the shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and who raised it high to shed its light on Scrooge, as he came peeping round. Come in, come in! I am the ghost of Christmas Present. Have never walked with my elder brothers? I don't think I have. Have you many brothers, Spirit? More than 1,800. Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it. Touch my robe. Scrooge did as he was told and held it fast. The room and its contents all vanished instantly, and they stood in the city streets upon a snowy Christmas morning. Scrooge and the ghost passed on, invisible, straight to Scrooge's clerks, and on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled, and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinklings of his torch. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, and laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in. What has ever got your precious father, then? Said Mrs. Cratchit. And in came little Bob, with at least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of the fringe, hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed, to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch, and his limbs supported by an iron frame. And how did little Tim behave? Asked Mrs. Cratchit. As good as gold, said Bob, and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much, and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me, coming home, that he hoped that people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day, who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brothers and sister to his stool beside the fire. Master Peter and the 2 ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. At last the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets, which would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and crackled noisily. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us." "God bless us, every one," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. "Mr. Scrooge," said Bob. "I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "The founder of the feast, indeed," cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. "The odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow." "My dear," was Bob's mild answer, "Christmas Day." Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for 5 full minutes. After it had passed away, they were 10 times merrier than before, from the mere relief of Scrooge from the baleful being done with. The chestnuts in the jug went round and by they had a song about a lost child traveling in the snow, from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice and sang it very well indeed. They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed, their shoes were far from being waterproof, their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. It was a great surprise to Scrooge as the scene vanished, to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room, with the spirit standing and smiling by his side and looking at that same nephew. Suddenly, as they stood together in an open place, the bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it no more. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he held a solemn phantom and draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. Stave 4. The phantom was shrouded in deep black garment, which concealed its head. I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, ghost of the future. I fear you more than any specter I have seen. Will you not speak to me? It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them. I know. Lead on, spirit. The city seemed to spring about them as the spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. No, said a great fat man with a monstrous chin. I don't know much. I only know he's dead. What has he done with his money? Asked a red-faced gentleman. Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to a conversation apparently so trivial. They left this busy scene and went into an obscure part of town, to a low shop where iron, old rag, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. A gray-haired rascal of great age sat smoking his pipe. Spirit, I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way right now. Merciful heaven, what is this? The scene had changed. The ghost conducted him to poor Bob Cratchit's house and found the mother and the children seated round the fire. Quiet. Very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner. And he took a child and set him in the midst of them. Where had Scrooge heard those words? He had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out as he and the spirit crossed the threshold. The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hand up to her face. The color hurts my eyes, she said. I wouldn't show the weak eyes to your father when he comes home. Oh, it must be near his time. Past it, rather, Peter answered, shutting up his book. But I think he has walked a little slower than he used these few last evenings, Mother. I have known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder, very fast indeed. And so have I, cried Peter, often. But he was very light to carry, and his father loved him so that it was no trouble. And there is your father at the door. She hurried out to meet him, and little Bob and his comforter, she had need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him to it the most. Then the two young Cratchits got upon his knees and laid, each child, a cheek against his face, as if they said, Don't mind it, father, don't be grieved. Bob was very cheerful with them and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and the speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Saturday, he said. My little child! My little child! He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him to a dismal, wretched, ruinous churchyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed to one. Before I draw nearer, answer me one question. Are these shadows of the things that will be, or are they shadows of the things that may be only? Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave which it stood. Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends. Scrooge, trembling as he went, followed the finger and read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. No, spirit, oh, no, spirit, hear me. I am not the man I was. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all year. Holding up his hands, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in. He was checked in transports by the churches ringing out the lustiest pearls he had ever heard. Running to the window, he opened it, put out his head. What's today? Cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy. Today? Why, Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one at the corner? I should hope I did. An intelligent boy, a remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Go and buy it and tell him to bring it here. I'll give you half a crown. The boy was off like a shot. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit. He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. In the afternoon, he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock. Is your master at home, my dear? Said Scrooge to the girl. Nice girl, very. He's in the dining room, sir, along with mistress. He knows me, said Scrooge, with his hand already on the dining room lock. I'll go in here, my dear. Why, bless my soul, cried Fred. Who's that? It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred? Let him in? It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. A wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful anonymity, wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. And he did it. Bob was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Hello? Growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it. What do you mean by coming here at this time of day? I'm very sorry, sir. I am behind my time. You are? Yes. Step this way, if you please. It's only once a year, sir. I shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir. Now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I am not going to stand this sort of thing any longer. And therefore I'm about to raise your salary. A Merry Christmas, Bob, said Scrooge with earnestness that could not be mistaken as he clapped him on the back. We will discuss your affairs this afternoon over a bowl of smoking bishop. Scrooge was better than his world. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He had no further intercourse with spirits, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, and if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be true